Welcome, everyone. I'm so glad you guys can come out tonight. Tonight, the Pound Ridge Land Conservancy, in coordination with the Pound Ridge Conservation Board and, of course, the Pound Ridge Library, who hosts us in this tremendous space, we're here to discover the magic of Pound Ridge trees, presented by Jim Nordgren. Jim is an environmental consultant living in Madison, Connecticut, and has a remarkable history in the conservation space. As town supervisor in Lewisboro, New York, he helped preserve 1,000 acres of open space, strengthened water protection laws, and helped create the four-town Eastern Westchester Biotic Corridor. He's also written natural resource inventories, land management plans, and baseline documentation reports, and open space plans for the Westchester Land Trust, Open Space Institute, Scenic Hudson, the Watershed Agricultural Council, the North Salem Open Space Foundation, John J. Homestead Historical Site, Storm King, and of course, every preserve owned by Pound Ridge Land Conservancy for at least a decade, and many, many others, including individual landholders who've sought his advice on managing their land. Jim has planned and supervised invasive removal and native plant restoration on 100 acres at 11 sites. He's really just a conservation genius, and we are so, so lucky to have him. He's given guest lectures on environmental issues at Yale School of the Environment and Union College, and enjoys leading nature walks. Jim holds a master's degree in environmental management from Yale School of Environment, an MBA from the Wharton School of Finance, and is a qualified forester for the Watershed Agricultural Council. Tonight, we are indeed fortunate to have Jim here to share with us the magic of Pound Ridge's trees, giving us an overview of the magic, how trees protect us and simply make us happier. I couldn't agree with more. So without further ado, I give you Jim Nordgren.
Thank you, Pam. I'm glad my daughter could hear that because she doesn't believe any of that stuff. But so a little off topic, but it's been a long week. So I'm thinking maybe we should maybe a group hug, maybe a little group hug. And yeah. My daughter came up. We've had a lot of discussions the last couple of days, but a couple concepts. One is that I think is helpful: zoom in and zoom out. I've not heard that. I think she made it up. Maybe you've heard of it, maybe the concept, but obviously it means when you zoom out and things look a little chaotic, what do? You feel powerless. You zoom in on, whatever you can do. So whether it's tending to the garden, like Voltaire said, or conservation here in Pound Ridge in Westchester, New York, that's what we're going to concentrate on. The other thing our daughter told us was, Dad, don't worry. It doesn't matter who's in charge. The trees are still beautiful. I thought that was wonderful. Thank you, Kat. So as Pamela said, I've had the pleasure of working for over the past 10 years, first with Krista, then Andrew, and now David, on probably 20 management plans on your preserves. So just being able to walk around and view beautiful preserves. I love doing that, of course. And what we found was, no surprise, Pound Ridge is at least 70% wooded. And that's even better than that because the other like 25% are reservoirs, right? So it's pretty much undeveloped in a natural state. And what I think is remarkable, you're right in the middle of White Plains and Danbury and Stamford, and somehow you've been able to keep it wooded. And even, those are cities, even the suburbs. I mean, Ridgefield is getting really, really congested, traffic and everything. And, Fairfield County. So what you've done, you may not know it, but it's remarkable. And it doesn't just happen. I don't have to tell you this, but a lot of paperwork, but they say to save something, you have to love it. To love it, you have to understand it. And to understand it, you know, you got to research it and convince the powers that be that things need to be protected. So don't read all these. But this is not normal to have this many studies of the environment in a town. So congratulations. Now, the comprehensive plan, which you're updating, you know, towns do that now, fortunately in New York. Natural resource inventory, natural resource inventory. Some towns are starting to do this, not many. Hudsonia did a study on your significant habitats. Hudsonia, I mean, they're the best, and you've used that. On the upper right, Pamela mentioned I was able to, in Lewisboro, but I did it with your help and the help of North Salem, the Eastern Westchester Biotic Corridor. Now, that's spread, and we'll talk about the importance of corridors for wildlife and for plants. But at the time, that was the first one done in the nation, according to Pace University. So congratulations again. And then this goes back to the 70s, land use through ecology. You had 3 foresters from Yale spending, I think it was 7 years. And that was in response to some development. And the idea was, let's plan development, but plan it around ecology. You know, that nobody was doing that in the 70s. And then of course, and I'm going to talk, the topic is magic, but we're going to talk about facts too. And we can talk about facts and magic and head versus heart, and do facts matter? Here you've got the patron saint of nature, your own Sarah Stein. Now we all know Doug Tallamy, and following his work in the pollinator pathway, she was doing this decades before that. So that's kind of the heart of conservation in Pound Ridge. And it's flattery, but it's true. You think it's normal, other towns are not doing this. Go. Anna's here.
Figure it out.
I'm glad Hannah and Madison are here. Years ago, I actually paid a tech person to stand next to me. And we advance it by hand.
Excuse me. Sorry, people.
I was just going to show, we'll get to it, just a picture of all the preserves that David and Andrew and Kristen and I have walked. And the trees are unique. The trees at Armstrong, for instance, are over 3 feet in diameter. And what's kind of fun is to go out with the notebook and measure a tree. And a tree grows on average 1 foot every 50 years. So I take my notebook, I'm measuring 3 times. You've got trees that are 3 feet long. That mean they were growing for 150 years from the Civil War. And that was the first time that Pound Ridge, after it was settled, really got abandoned in the Civil War. After the Civil War, farming was difficult here. There were stories from other people around the country how in Ohio you could plow for a mile without hitting a stone, and of course all we have here are stones. Once that people left, and then they left again another wave in the 30s when Hiram Halley started fixing up the abandoned houses. Hard to believe they're abandoned. But that's how this forest regrew, especially at Armstrong. You've got 3 foot large black oaks, red oaks, tulips, which can get big very fast, and sugar maples. But some other unique things here, you've got southern trees and northern trees. So you've got in some of the swamps, we found black ash, which is a northern tree, not a green ash, a black ash. That's a northern tree. We've also found sweet gum, and this is the furthest north I've ever seen sweet gum that were naturally occurring. You know, they're down around the shore of Mamaroneck, but you have sweet gum here. You also have tupelos in the red maple swamps, and that's a southern tree, much more common down south. But in addition to that, like at the fire tower and some other rocky ridge tops, you've got pitch pines, which, I mean, that just looks like the Adirondacks to me, you know, way up on a bald, they call it. And of course, you have your hemlocks. You know, the hemlocks are shrinking because of woolly adelgid. We're treating them in some areas. Hopefully, they will persist. But you have big hemlock groves deep in the river ravines. And you also have plantations and Norway spruce, things like that. I wanted to point out the 3-foot wide beach, but I mentioned that. In addition to these northern and southern trees, of course, we just went through the fall, the most beautiful foliage on earth, and I can prove it. We're not just bragging. We have the most beautiful foliage on earth. And this is a picture of the reservation. I was saying beforehand, you've got, you know, the beautiful yellows, oranges, and reds and deep reds. But I was on a hike with some young kids, and they said, "Oh, Mr. Nordgren, pizza tree, pizza tree. What's a red maple actually has several different colors on one leaf. So they call this the pizza tree." And I guess you can see you got a little tomato sauce, a little cheese, maybe some green peppers in there. The reason we have the most beautiful foliage on earth is because, thank you, right here we have the two great forests of the eastern United States are overlapping. So, you know, most places have one type of tree, like aspen. You know, the pictures on the calendars, they're beautiful, yellow leaves, beautiful, but they're only yellow. But here you've got the maple beech forest in the north, the oranges and yellows of the maple and beech, and the southern oak hickory forest overlapping. And that's, I guess there's one other latitude somewhere in China that has the same sort of temperature and climate. They say they have foliage there too, but we can actually claim, without bragging, we have the most beautiful foliage. Don't you like that? It's true. I mentioned we'll talk about magic and facts. And there's a debate among environmentalists, you know, do facts even work? I mean, we've been talking about facts forever, and it doesn't get through. So sometimes we have to talk about the heart and the magic, because as humans, we're emotional. But these are the environmental services I'll go through briefly, and you all know this. These are the services that trees and plants provide. I actually hate the word environmental service, because as humans, we have to, if it doesn't give us a service or money, we don't value it. Instead, I think forests should be protected for intrinsic value as creation. But be that as it may, we have a capitalist economy, and you see this all the time. We need to protect trees to prevent flooding, to combat climate change, to cool the temperatures, right? All that stuff. And it's true, the only problem with that is, so trees absorb stormwater and they reduce flooding. But what if you have a stormwater basin, or trees absorb carbon dioxide and store it? But what if someday they have a machine that can suck carbon out of the air, like they're working on? Then the argument falls apart. Oh, we don't need trees anymore. But we need trees for intrinsic value, and we'll talk about why we need it for our health and other reasons. But going down this list, of course, trees, poundridge trees, provide habitat for plants and wildlife. I just got back from Ireland. It's beautiful. This is a picture of the west coast of Ireland. Do not bother packing binoculars. There were no birds. I could not believe it. No trees equal no insects equal no birds. They actually have 3 types of birds. Pamela said we have 70 here. 75. They have 3, and one of them is non-native, the non-native magpie. The other 2 are crows and starlings. And it's just bereft. It's an economic, and actually, and we were talking about this, actually, as soon as I got back 2 weeks ago, there was an article in the New York Times about Ireland being an ecological desert. Oh, it's fascinating. 600 BC, the first, and thank you for asking questions, please, makes it much more informal. The first Neolithic tribes from Europe came to Ireland and England, and in no time, believe it or not, denuded the entire landscape, for wood and then for grazing. And they actually did a study. I can't imagine, but like 3 guys with Neolithic axes reenacted the fact that they could each could cut down like 10 trees a day. So they actually denuded it in no time. Then the Vikings came, then the English in the 1600s, the settlement continued to graze, and it's basically grazing. But the real rub is that while nature comes back, and we'll talk about how the trees have regrown here, fortunately, but we can't always count on nature coming back. So in some areas, the heath, bogs are actually created by the lack of trees. They're not naturally occurring in all the bogs, and bogs cover much of the peat bogs, much of Ireland. The trees, if I can get this right, the trees, of course, intercept and absorb water, as we know. Without the trees, the water poured straight down for whatever, millennium, and drained all the minerals out of the soil. And they coalesced and formed like an iron can several feet down. And now the water is completely, it's saturated, the bogs, and trees cannot grow in that. So yes, trees grow back, but they don't always grow back, and we can't count them always growing back. No birds, 3 birds. I saw 2 insects. It was just bizarre. When I saw an insect on the windshield, wow, I haven't seen an insect. The other insect was in the plane, and I think it was a stowaway from JFK. I'm not kidding. People were freaking out. Oh, there's an insect, trying to get it. So Doug Tallamy, we know it is right, but it's one thing to hear about, we need trees and shrubs and plants for insects, not just for pollination, but for all the other reasons we need habitat. But to actually see it, it was just startling to me. Yes. They're trying since 1900, they tried different things on the German model, import non-native trees in plantations. So they're bringing back the Sitka pine from the Pacific Northwest. I don't know why but they have plantations of that. And if you see on the landscape, they stick out like a sore thumb. The other thing they're trying to do is it's easier to not get into this pickle. They're creating rows of hummocks in the bogs and planting trees in them. So they are trying to, I think they've gone from like 2% to now it might be 20% wooded in the last kind of 20 years or so. And they have big government subsidies to promote forestry.
We're seeing certain cups or whatever they're called, where they're taking desert, they're making these half shoe or whatever they're called, and they're actually seeing new growth coming back to life in areas that have been denuded for many years. we're not seeing the same thing here is what you're describing.
Yeah,
And
it's just
I guess
deep
maybe you
water.
can add a little bit of color to that. Is that if you added soil, it wouldn't make a difference is, I guess. what I'm-
It's just saturated. And if they stop grazing, presumably they will come back because we'll talk about in a second how seeds disperse and the trees grew back here. There are some ecological restorations very satisfying, even if it's, in your backyard or on a large scale. And there was the Dust Bowl, right? We don't hear about the Dust Bowl anymore. And that was the agricultural, soil and water, FDR, all these programs, these horrible programs. And they were able to restore grasses and prevent desertification, which is happening in Africa now and continuing to happen. There was a neat conference I went to, which is just very encouraging. It was a capped landfill in New Jersey. And the biologist didn't bring in soil and all manipulation, simply putting a couple poles around this landfill, believe it or not, in New Jersey, right by Manhattan. The birds came, sat on the pole, dropped some seeds, pooped some seeds out, some black cherries started coming back, and it came back. But, we can't always species go extinct. We can't always count on nature coming back.
Oh, it was an amazing movie called The Biggest Little Farm. I don't know who's seen it here. Biggest Little Farm.
Yeah.
I think it's, a few years ago, it was at the Playhouse. And they took, it was, just barren land that had been overfarmed. And the soil was depleted and they created fresh soil. It was massive. But by healing, bringing back the soil with worms and the compost, and creating that, the animals started coming.
Yeah, that's
It took
wonderful.
around 7 years, but
Not very long in the age of things, is it?
yeah, but
Yeah.
it's quite a movie. I just
And what's it called?
recommend it. The
Biggest Little Farm. Tears of Joy. Biggest Little Farm. Okay. So, of course, trees and woods provide habitat for wildlife, birds, and insects. And groups of trees create corridors. And we're talking about more corridors in Pound Ridge. And this now has been replicated by the Wildlife Conservation Society and many other areas around the greater New York area. And this is just great. From the reservoirs, the Sanford line, through the reservation, through Oldfield Preserve in Lewisboro, all the way up to Mountain Lakes Camp, is a pretty much unbroken corridor. And the trees are important to create corridors because obviously animals have to forage and roam. More interestingly, they have to mate. So they need genetic diversity, which is a problem if you're like a spotted turtle. How are you going to find a spotted turtle half a mile away when there are roads in the way? You're not going to. Without genetic diversity, we know that bad things happen to species. And when temperature's warm, did you read the article about the human body can't really, human body can't take over 100 degrees and 75% humidity. In the Times last week, they said by 2070, Chicago, Washington, DC, Houston will be uninhabitable. I mean, deadly for people. People dying now from heat stroke. We wanted to hold the temperature rise to 1.5 degrees centigrade. That was the goal. We hit it already. The world this year is at 1.5 degrees increase since the pre-industrial age. So the idea is corridors. My only concern is, And I wonder what you think, Art. It's great if some spotted turtle, is lucky enough to go north by accident. But they don't disperse that way. They go in all different 360 degrees. What about the ones that go south and west and east? So it's important I guess we need gigantic corridors, all across the Appalachians, all across the Northeast. But this is an attempt. So one of the services that trees provide are habitat for wildlife, but we don't think about too much how they provide habitat for plants themselves. Plants support plants. And in a functioning forest, we'll have all different ages, all different species types, all different height, vertical, horizontal diversity, and that makes the system stronger. So if you have just one type of tree, like a white pine in the reservation, the wind blows like it did 10 years ago, it all gets wiped out and Japanese Angelica comes in. But the canopy protects, shades, and retains moisture for the seedlings, of course. When there is a gap in the canopy from an event, we need intermediate trees to grow up. And so in that way, it's hard to think about, but there's plant habitat. Plants support themselves. They support the seedlings. The problem, of course, all over the Northeast since 1970 is there's no regeneration of the forest on the left. This could be anywhere. It might be Pound Ridge, but it could be anywhere. There's some foresters who think once the older trees, I said some are 100, 150 years old, they're going to age out. Once they die, we will have no forests. I don't believe that. Here at Goldfine, I don't know if you were with me, maybe it was Andrew. It was unbelievable. Like, how come the deer haven't eaten these? There's a whole understory of, now they're Norway spruce, and the deer don't really like to eat the spruce because they're prickly, but that was nice to see. And I think, no one believes me, but I think the deer population has peaked. I mean, nobody believes me. We just saw a picture of a bobcat. Bobcats 20 years ago were never seen. Yes.
You said diversity fosters resilience in the forest and everywhere.
Right.
I just wanted to
Thank you.
put a comment out to you guys.
All the parts have to fit together in ways we don't even know when we take one. Hi, Susan. I was saying, going through my notes, I've counted 13 deer exposures. So you're working on the problem by putting up fencing around so that some trees can grow back. And once the deer population decreases, yep, thank you, we'll have plenty of trees. But yes, yes. I know it's kind of harsh, but it's not only that. It's not only that. It's the coyotes, as you know. When I first saw a coyote, I looked it up, and they, the old books say a small dog. These things are huge, right? So nature abhors a vacuum. There are plenty of deer. The coyotes here, as you know, have interbred in Canada with gray wolves, and they're much bigger. They can eat deer, and they're coyote everywhere, Manhattan. The interesting thing is that black bear, which are back in huge numbers. Again, this is kind of sad. Cover your ears. But a fawn gives off no scent. That's how the story it goes. The mother leaves the fawn unattended in the middle of a field all day long, and we think they're abandoned. They're not, because nothing can smell it. Black bear can smell fawn, and it's a mismatch. So it's gruesome, but the black bear are eating fawn. About 20 years ago, there was a person in Lewisboro on our highway department. His job every morning was to take the dump truck up and down Route 35, picking up the dead deer carcasses. You don't see that anymore. So I think, we get excited about contraceptives for deer hunting, which might help a little bit. But nature is taking care of the problem. By the time humans know there's a problem, hopefully nature's taking care of it. The other services, I'll go quickly because we know this. Trees filter water, they absorb storm water, they control flooding. Here's a picture on the left in Columbia County on a natural resource inventory I'm working on. That's a vernal pool. I was shocked. Talk about crying in bad tears. They had clear cut right down to the edge of this wetland, this vernal pool. And what's going to happen there, of course, it'll silt in without the trees. The trees shade it and keep the temperature for trout streams and for amphibians breeding here just right. So they're not boiling. And they keep it from evaporating. Salamanders lay their eggs just on the edge of the water where they think the water level will be, when the eggs hatch. And without the trees, it dries up. Fortunately, in Pound Ridge, you have the most progressive wetland ordinance in New York State. In fact, in Lewisboro, we copied it. 150-foot buffer. Here in Columbia County, there's no wetland protection at all. Yes. Progressive, strict, yep. Most enlightened, maybe is a better word. I hate to say strict. People freak out when, regulation. Well, as Michael Clemens told me, why do we care about salamanders and wood frogs and spotted turtles that can only breed marbled salamanders, spotted salamanders, Jefferson salamanders, can only breed in vernal pools that dry up later in the summer and therefore don't have fish that would normally eat the eggs. He explained to me that the vernal pools are the nursery of the forest. That's the bottom of the food chain. Raccoons and other things and great blue herons would just hang out all day eating salamander eggs in the vernal pool. So the problem with vernal pools, fortunately, your comprehensive plan recommends extending protection to wetlands that are smaller than a quarter acre in size. And in Lewisboro, we protect all wetlands regardless of size. In New York State, they only protect wetlands that are 12.5 acres in size. So the vernal pools are just filled in without anybody ever even knowing it. They're not mapped, nobody even knows. Yes, but they're not, you don't protect right now, as I understand it, wetlands smaller than 1/4 acre. I might be wrong, okay, but that's something we all want to push for, and I think it's in your comprehensive plan. Because vernal pools are tiny. So
20 years now? I think at least 20 years.
Well, they do, but as my daughter was saying about biodiversity and different species and the importance, if you have salamanders, you're not going to have mosquitoes because the salamanders, once they come out from the egg, they eat mosquito eggs. So it's all in balance. And then the bats, and we don't have bats. Yeah, hopefully. But we do. But I read that the white nose syndrome, they're working on ways, and maybe nature will balance that out somehow. But yeah, you have to have bats, or you have mosquitoes, and you have West Nile. Now, if we get something to eat the ticks. Yeah. Possums, aren't they cute? Yeah. The other picture, so copy Lewisboro's wetland ordinance, because we protect all size, regardless of how small they are. Yes, it's cooperative. It's cooperative.
Talk into the mic so that our friends on the Zoom are able to hear.
And I can repeat it. It's a question about why vernal pools are important. Thank you. The other thing that trees do, of course, is they prevent erosion. Oh boy, we've been reading about disasters in Spain and landslides in California. Man, if you don't have trees, and now unfortunately we can say it's a matter of life and death. Here in Columbia County, there's no restriction. That's a steeper slope than it looks like, probably 25%. They just cut the trees, and we're working on an ordinance to protect that. Fortunately, in Pound Ridge, on slopes 15% or greater, you need to get a tree permit. Again, the obvious, we depend in Pound Ridge, most of northern Westchester on well water, drinking water. Now this is the reservoir, New York City. Someone said, why do we care about New York City's water? Well, we should. Here's the Armstrong Preserve, and you have, trees right up to the reservoir because the trees are filtering the pollutants that go into our drinking water. It's interesting to note that New York City DEP requires a 300-foot vegetative buffer around the reservoirs. And if that doesn't tell you how important trees and vegetation are to keeping our drinking water clean, it does. And then this, it's getting dire. Speaking of life and death, when we started learning about climate change, it didn't dawn on anybody that we'd have heavier rains in 24 hours. Didn't anticipate that. But this is Mount Pleasant, southern Westchester. We did a plan for them and didn't really know what to say because they have no pervious surface anymore. And they're very steep, along the sawmill, which always floods. And this is an auto body shop, and this is Ida, all the way at the top. I don't know how many feet up that is, but this poor guy, and towns are settled around the rivers. That's why Vermont gets wiped out now when there's heavy rain. There's no place for them to move. He said when he sees the weatherman with that red heavy precipitation, he's got to move everything out. The only recommendation we have is to buy out these properties. And Trumbull did that. There's FEMA money. Are you skeptical? It's got to be positioned as willing sellers. And people will be willing. You get flooded 3 times and you're throwing out your rugs, every couple of months. You want to sell and you have nobody to sell it to, but the federal government will buy them out. And they did it in Trumbull, and I'm sure they're doing it in other places. So it is life and death. Hurricane Ida killed 5 people in Westchester County. We're not used to those kind of disasters. The other, to run through the rest of the services of, we didn't talk about the wetlands, but the wetlands like the vernal pools they're where the aquifer opens up to the sky. Our wetlands are all recharge wetlands, meaning they recharge the aquifer. And we're all on wells. So the wetlands have to be protected for that reason. But I think Pam asked, how do wetlands protect trees? Trees protect wetlands, and you had me on that one. But I did a little research, and it turns out wetlands maintain atmospheric moisture. They have a microclimate where they evaporate and they create more moisture. Kind of think of, the fog in the valleys when in the wetlands. So in that regard, they protect plants and trees. Of course, a lot of trees grow right on the edge, the tupelos and buttonbush and all that. So the wetlands provide water for the plants. The interesting thing we'll never know is beaver are coming back, like bear, like bobcat, thank goodness. There's a thought that before the beaver were extirpated from New York State in 1600, gone that quickly, that we had way more wetlands in the Northeast, and that it actually changed the climate dramatically by having those wetlands. And as you know from the stats, not only the beaver gone, but we've lost 50% of the wetlands in the United States. So you had me on that one, Pam. I wasn't quite sure how do wetlands, but they have their own microclimate. So. done with facts. And again, we all wrestle with public policy, like even before recently, facts just don't do it. You know, we're always scientists, facts, facts, facts. And scientists have to know 99% or they can't say it for sure. And we need emotion, you know, stories about stone walls. So after seeing the desolate Western Ireland landscape at the pub, I saw this nice quote from Yeats. The world is full of magical things. Just have to look for them. First magical thing, the forest regrew. Again, we can't always count on nature coming back, but if we stop poisoning, if we stop hunting, stop killing, nature can come back. And this is Pound Ridge, you know, in the 1800s. As I said, when farming would prove to be not sustainable here, everyone moved and the trees grew back. Some seeds, second time they grew back. In the glaciers 10,000 years ago, the trees had to grow back. And it's perplexing to scientists. There were no trees down to like southern New Jersey. How the heck, in 10,000 years is not a long time in Earth, in geology. How did they all come back? And I think maybe some trees were refugia. Maybe there were some trees, even though the ice was 3 feet tall, 3 miles tall. But here it was easy because we had resprouting trees. You know, we get mad when our invasives keep resprouting, but we have to remember it's good when plants resprout. So if you look through the woods, you'll see where there has been timber harvest everywhere. And oaks and red maples and some other trees, not all of them resprout. So on the right, that tree was cut. These trunks, or maybe you could guess for fun, 70 years old. So maybe in 1950, somebody did a timber harvest. And thankfully they sprouted back. Chestnuts still sprout. They were killed in 1930. And the roots are, it's poignant. The roots are still, and they sprout up and then they die, but they're still resprouting. Yes, Pam.
So we cut down a lot of ash trees
Mhm.
due to the emerald ash borer, and I see a lot of sprouting around those stumps. Is that something we can help for?
Yes, I've seen that too. And it's just so fulfilling to see the tree sprouting back. And it turns out the emerald ash borer is smart. It doesn't go after young ash because there's not enough like bark in there to get in there. So we have a lot of young ash that are still healthy, and the emerald ash borer is not affecting them. So the hope is like the gypsy moth, now called spongy moth, things will come by, nature will take care of it. Something will take care of the emerald ash borer and keep it under control. And then that's why we look to these little sprouts to keep going. And the idea that used to be like cut all the ash trees, it's terrible. I mean, yes, you have to cut them if they're going to fall and hurt somebody, but some, maybe 1% might be, might be resistant, right? And you won't know if you cut them all down. Yeah, that's the seed tree. So when the emerald ash borer is gone, the ash will come back. You know, I forgot to mention the last, back to science. It's important. Trees moderate drought. Who would think we'd be having droughts and heavy rain and all that stuff? But you know, I thought the foliage would be horrible because of the drought. It's beautiful. And I can't prove it, but I think there's a lot of moisture still in the soil around here in Connecticut. The trees are, the grass is not even dying. Even though we haven't had rain in 2 months, and it's because the trees moderate drought. They hold water, the roots create pores where oxygen and water can go down. They transpire water back up, and they moderate drought. And they also, my other note was that they cool temperatures. There's a reason people came from New York City up to here 100 years ago, because it was cooler. When we moved here, the new subdivisions didn't even have air conditioning. That was, you know, like 1980. It was still cool and hadn't heated up enough. But the cooling ability of the forests can make a huge difference. Pick a number, 10, 20 degrees difference than a city that has the city effect. And as I said, it's not just going to be uncomfortable. You know, we can, in theory, go from our car air conditioning to our house air conditioning to our work air conditioning. But what about people who have to work outside? What about agriculture and construction? And as that New York Times article said, these cities in 50 years at this temperature increase are going to be uninhabitable. So trees are very important for cooling the temperature. The bad news is, here's a graph of 1600, the trees in Connecticut, Massachusetts, Vermont, going down to the nadir, as I said, at the Civil War, abandonment of farms, miraculously trees come back magically. Bill McGibbon, the great environmental writer from Vermont, said this is the great environmental story of the United States that you take for granted or you don't hear about, or is that the Northeast forest came back. Problem is, since about 1980, we're losing because of development and sprawl. And I have a star there where Pound Ridge is still up there. But in our town of Madison, where there's some good data on land cover by UConn, we have lost net in the last 30 years, 100,000 trees. We have a wonderful program called Mad for Trees where the volunteers are giving out trees, and they gave out, I mean, it's great. They gave out over 100 last year. Do the math, it'll take 1,000 years. I mean, we have to stop cutting trees. We're trying to work on a tree ordinance to stop it. But because of sprawl, unfortunately, the curve is turning down in the Northeast. We're losing our forests. Well, that's a whole nother thing. Even if we stop cutting them, the trees help us. The trees need our help. Between the diseases, now there's beech leaf disease, emerald ash borer, oak wilts. The sugar maples that we talk about and love are dying out from the heat. They're dying now. They're a northern tree. The butternut is pretty much gone from butternut canker. The hemlocks, we did aerial photos of some of the Land Conservancy's preserves, and the area, making up numbers, a 20-acre hemlock grove is down to, a fraction of that now. So the trees need our help. And name a tree and there's a disease for it now, it seems. So yeah, the trees help us, but we have the problem from heat and invasive pests. So back to magic, the fun part. I was a little skeptical about this communication of trees stuff, to tell you the truth, but it's amazing. Look at the acorns, right? You're having huge acorns here, right? Connecticut, I mean, they're banging on the car, they're all over the place. People are complaining. It's great this year. And the cynics say, oh, it's just a natural pattern. I don't believe it, because the white oaks aren't doing it. Red oaks are doing it this year. And they're not doing it in the whole United States. They're doing it in certain areas. And the idea, of course, is if you're a red oak and you put out 10 acorns, well, you're going to have 10 squirrels, and the squirrels are going to eat them all. But about every couple of years, the oaks get together. Come on, everybody, let's do it. And they put out 100 acorns, and the squirrels can't eat them all. Some survive, the seedlings survive. And if you go through the woods, I was talking about looking at cut trees, you can see sometimes the oaks are all kind of the same age, and they weren't planted. It's because of a mast year. They were all, from a gigantic acorn harvest. Yes.
I heard, and it could be, it might not be true, but I heard that when there is a bumper crop of oak trees, of acorns, it means that there's going to be a severe winter. That the trees somehow know that there's gonna be some
They
growth on
tried
it
that with
coming.
the woolly bear caterpillar. You know, the width of the brown. And I read this recently. They actually did a study in 1950. It was like Farmer's Almanac, you know, like, so not quite, like to believe it, but not, can't prove it yet. We got our ski pass. I hope you're right. The, no, yeah, for a cold winter, right? Predicting a cold winter. So trees coordinate. Trees also warn each other. And the gypsy moth is now called the spongy moth for obvious reasons. And the caterpillars are really bad now, kind of north of I-84. And they come and go every couple years. This is kind of a diagram of trees communicating. So they noticed when the spongy moth caterpillar infestation came out, the oaks deforested, lost their leaves, defoliated, but they put out more tannins, and the tannins are hard for the caterpillars to eat. So it's a natural resistance. So they noticed that in these spongy moth outbreaks, all the oaks were putting out tannin, and they thought, that's pretty cool. You know, the oaks can kind of sense it and put it out. But what they didn't know is why the spongy moth is here, why miles away are the oaks putting out more tannin? And the cynics said, oh, that's, you know, that's just because, you know, there's spongy moths everywhere. So what they did was they mimicked the injury that a spongy moth caterpillar would do on an oak leaf. No spongy moths around. And guess what? The oak put out tannins, and the oaks down the road put out tannins. So they communicate. Yep. Pheromones. Yep. And of course, this was the coolest thing I found walking in the woods recently. The Hidden Life of Trees, we all have read that book, and I was skeptical. I mean, yes, communication, but the idea that the trees kind of mourn at the hole in the ground, you know, I couldn't get over that until I saw this in, this was outside Schenectady. So this is called inosculation. I had to look that up. And it's when the trees merge together, and you've seen this, and they're actually sharing nutrients. So I thought that was cool. And then I stepped back and I said, wait a minute, that on the left is a hemlock, and the hemlocks are all diseased and dying, and this one was healthy. I bet, I can't prove it, it's getting nutrients from the red maple. And then I go a little further down, like Yates said, you just got to look for magic. And I see this inosculation again. And on the right, there's an elm tree. And most of the elms, big ones, are dead from Dutch elm disease. This one was healthy. It's getting nutrients from the sugar maple. So they actually do, they nurse each other. So yeah, so I take it back. I should not have been cynical about the hidden life of trees. So the last part, in wrapping up here, trying to think about why do we like nature? Why do we like trees? And I took a course from Stephen Keller, who wrote this book with the world famous E.O. Wilson, who just recently passed away. And they called it the biophilia hypothesis. They tried to understand, why are we drawn to nature? And since this, there have been hundreds of studies, and you've read these, that people heal faster in a hospital if they can look out at a tree. If there are trees in a housing project in an urban area, there's less crime. So we know nature somehow helps us mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally. Their idea is we've been living in nature as Homo sapien for 2 million years. And if you do the math, and I can't wrap my head around it, it's only been the last 100 years maybe, that our relatives have not been on the land. So we're doing an experiment ourselves you know, for 99.9% of human history, we've lived in the woods, in nature. And now we wonder why we're having all sorts of emotional problems and things like that, and obesity, and no one seems really happy. And their hypothesis is because we live in nature. We have to be in nature. See? So this is kind of on the head. This is the heart side. And if you haven't read Betty Smith's book, if an author can make stone walls fascinating, and she did, if somebody can make an ailanthus tree lovable, then she did it. She's a great writer. So if you haven't read it, reread it. And it's the story, of course, a tree grows in Brooklyn, and it's a tree of heaven, which I hated, right? But every plant, everything deserves respect. They didn't ask to be brought over here, right? They were the tree of heaven. They didn't ask to be brought over here. And it's a metaphor for resilience. And so, do we love nature because we have to? It's in our genes. Or do we love nature just emotionally? I mean, is there anything like seeing something grow? The satisfaction of seeing something grow, planting something. And as she says at the end of the book, Francine, who really is Betty Smith, autobiographical, the tree had been cut down, tree of heaven, but it hadn't died. A new branch had grown. The tree that the men had chopped down, this tree that they built a bonfire around, trying to burn up its stump, this tree lived, and nothing could destroy it. So, I mean, that really just gets me. I did cut a couple tree of heaven the other day and treated them, but I did it with respect. What, Pam? Yeah. How do you feel about that? So again, is it because we have to be in nature, or is there something else? Maybe they're intertwined. But this is our old house. When we moved in, what are those big pine trees doing there? I didn't know the tradition in the 1800s of marriage pines. And if you see an old farmhouse, you still may see two, and they planted it for the bride and groom. And the idea is they grow together like that. So the trees are kind of a memorial or a celebration. Could be.
And that was a tradition?
Yeah, they're called marriage pines. Yep, common tradition. Unfortunately, if you drive by this house, guess what? We put a lightning rod in the top to protect them. We sold it to a nice young couple from Manhattan who doesn't know about nature. How could they? They don't know, and that's the risk. If a generation now is divorced from nature, how are they ever going to learn it? They cut them down.
About is when we moved in, our next door neighbors, after major windstorm, they got a fine for removing all of the trees that were within 30 feet of their house. And we've seen this throughout the neighborhood, and especially with these windstorms. They're really afraid of the trees falling on them.
Yeah, and I have to respect that. The way you get around it, and we'll talk about this maybe in March, is, well, these trees, they buffer each other. The roots grow together. If there were one tree, it might tip over. But the roots, they now know, go out way further than the drip line, and they're intertwined. So trees in groves are much less likely to tip over because the roots are they're supporting each other, nursing each other. So you don't plant one tree. One tree is not going to make it. I see construction sites where the tree ordinance save that tree, and then it gets compacted with, one tree is not going to make it. It's going to get sunburned. It's not used to it. It's not used to the wind. It hasn't built up resistance. So who knows if these would come down, but if you, in the future, if there's a grove, you plant a grove and it will be secure. And then when you do have to cut a tree down, of course, if it's dangerous, you have to cut down a tree, but you can replant it with understory trees. You know, a red cedar that's not going to get very tall, a serviceberry, a crabapple, a dogwood, a hawthorn, a hackberry. And then the one last, just to
Well,
embarrass my,
I-
this is my
I
last
had-
slide, just to embarrass, yes.
I had just one other question. Does New York City get the benefit of us protecting our lands or having more trees by cooling the area and the air in this area? Does it impact Lower Westchester or into the city?
Yeah, I don't think so. I was trying to make the case in my mind. But when you think about it, it's got to only be a very localized, you know, the shade and the cooling and the transpiration of moisture. I'd love to say it does, but it's got to be very localized. I mean, step out on your driveway and it's noticeably hotter, or in the sidewalk or in a playground. But they do benefit from we protect their drinking water. And actually we got the benefit too, because that's why it's so beautiful here, all the reservoirs. So my last point, to embarrass my other daughter. So do we love trees and plant them? There's a cynical reason that Stephen Keller mentioned. He actually, and I hope not, that it's our way to be immortal. Where when we plant things, we know that will be maintained and growing long after we're gone. Are we just being selfish? You know, it's just, he thought in a way it's a monument to ourselves. Or are we doing it, I hope, just to give back to creation? So here we are on the left. We just pulled this little sugar maple, little sapling a few years ago. I'm a little bit younger looking. And then to see it grow like this the other day. And the daughter's growing up now too. But I mean, it's the reason we do this. And then of course, this wonderful quote that the one who plants trees begins to understand the meaning of life. Do you buy it? That's it. So comments? Yes.
How do you view bars or all the acid on this lot and trees? The understory is coming back, but it's, you know, it's a barberry and it's a sapphire. It's like sapphire bush. Yeah, and then it's not the trees. Do you think it's a healthy, sustainable backyard or forest, or are we really seeing the end of
the problem and you'll see this in the spring, everywhere in the greater New York area, you'll see the barberry. Just the whole understory is barberry. And the problem is the red maples grow in the wet area. I mean, the red maples do too. The ash grow in the wet areas. And without them, it's water and sunlight, and it just grows barberry. So, right, the barberry is everywhere. When there's a gap, like we're saying, there's no understory, there are no seedlings and saplings to grow up. That's why you all are making deer exclosures and things like that. And again, it looks terrible right now. I agree. I mean, this like Jeff Ward, you may have heard speak, from the Connecticut Ag. I wouldn't do this, but they have mounted spray guns just going through the Connecticut forest just to kill all the barberry. But the hope is with the deer on the wane, the understory can come back. I've seen, and it's not just that, it's the honeysuckle and the multifloral rose and the bittersweet. But I've seen some trees grow, I like to be an optimist, growing inside a barberry bush. because the deer can't get in there. But yeah, it's terrible. I mean, what can you do? You can get rid of some of the barberry, and what we do, to answer your question, it's not that hard.
But there's also like sapphire ferns.
Yeah, yeah, that's another new one.
Should we keep them because there's nothing else growing, or?
Well, this is the argument
And
that,
then-
that Bedford Audubon says, at least it's cover.
Right,
But then there's a whole nother argument about, should we keep invasives? So they did a study and they found that a hedge of multifloral rose, whatever, sure, it's a thicket, be rabbits in there and birds. But what they found was that the predators, the fox, the skunks, possums, the raccoons, because it was a uniform of barberry or whatever, the birds nested in the same spot. And the predators, it was like an Easter egg hunt. They were able to just pick them off. So it didn't need, the answer is the invasive hedge didn't even provide cover for birds. But what we do, you pull some barberry out, you have seedlings, transplant it, put a little chicken wire around it, and in no time, you could see how the deer have just been hammering stuff, and it's so satisfying. Little chicken wire. We did this in the Levy Preserve, and we put up 300 pieces of chicken wire. We had a grant. We could have brought in all this, planted all this stuff, you know, $100 a tree times 300, and it's, don't do it, because you tear up the ground with the machinery. It's expensive. You're planting something that's a different genotype, probably grown in North Carolina, probably grown with nitrogen, you know, to grow fast. The deer really love that. From North Carolina, it's not used to these temperatures. So what we did was let nature do the work. And you find these saplings, they're all there. They won't make it through the winter. The deer will eat them. They're all there. And you protect them with a little chicken wire. And then as soon as and they grow fast. As soon as they got like that, we got wire weld and put them around that. And we've got a forest now. So do that in your backyard. And it's fun to do. It doesn't cost anything. And nature knows. We weren't sure what to plant, you know, some pretty dogwoods. Well, it was an oak hickory forest. So nature knew. So it's oak hickories.
So Massachusetts has banned these type of incentives. They do no longer allow you to purchase barberry, for argument's sake. Why are we not doing the same in, say, New York?
Yeah, I don't know, but I'm always I always know the lobby is very lobbyists are very powerful. The nursery makes a lot of money doing that. The way around that is to grandfather it. You know, you can sell your existing stock, you won't lose money, but don't lose any more. But I imagine there's a big fight by the industry to not do that. On the flip side, we have to ask for it too. The number one planted tree in the United States is a Norway maple. Still, well, the landscapers sell, like the nice couple who came up from New York. Well, you don't want an oak or hickory because they're messy, they call it. Or like a mulberry or a black cherry. Well, the messiness is the food for the wildlife. And so they say they're still planting Norway maple. So my point is we have to ask for it also. It's not just on the nursery to not do it. My other point is it's not that dire. This is ground zero for invasives in the United States. They all come in through the ports of New Jersey and New York for the last several hundred years. If you go a little further north, you see native shrubs and wildflowers. So don't lose heart. This is particularly bad here with the sawmill and I-84 and the hope is, we don't like to use chemicals, but you can spot treat. And hopefully there are biocontrols. Remember purple loosestrife? Before I knew, I thought, how beautiful. Every clover leaf of the interstate, all purple. Well, quietly, they developed, they found the pest, brought it over, and it worked. So purple loosestrife, you still see a little bit, which is fine, but you don't see it everywhere. So the hope is there'll be biocontrols. And then the hope is nature, like I said, you know, there's a fungus that has come along to attack the spongy moth. There is a new fungus that's attacking the rose, the multifloral rose. So you could see that like the end of the multifloral rose is all gnarled and kind of purpley. So that's the hope. You know, you can spot, get spots, protect seedlings.
Yeah.
There seems to be none. Yeah, right? We've tried everything.
Still say it's counterintuitive. I still say it's counterintuitive to be able to sell invasives and yet try to
Of
fight
course.
or keep them under control. It
No,
just
of
makes no
course.
sense.
Agree totally, but I mean, you know, who controls things? Stilt grass, we used to say you could weed whack it just before it went to seed. If you do that for a couple years. I think Mindy tried that. She said, passed away, said maybe it worked. But what there's another idea on the optimistic side that it burns itself out after like 10 years. Have you heard this?
Yeah.
10 years, yeah, I haven't seen it yet, but yeah, yeah. And the other problem is the deer hooves just keep spreading the stilt grass, and they think the deer are a big reason the stilt grass is everywhere. Well, this is the other problem is, you know, we say, you know, let your lawn go, you know, cut it once, twice maybe, and you will get beautiful clover and everything. But unless I do it myself, but if you have a landscaper, unless you tell that landscaper to wash the tires of the mower, yeah, good luck. Each time, they're just gonna keep spreading it. And it spreads the mugwort, we didn't talk about it, spreads the mugwort everywhere. Anywhere a lawnmower has been, it's mugwort. You gotta wash the tires off. Big sigh. Okay.
Well, we take.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
that's Doug Talamy's idea. If we can have developments, but if we do it so that all four houses' backyards are natural and they're connected, you have a little corridor. That's the answer. 100 million homes. If everybody grew natives, we wouldn't have much to worry about. Oh,
I have a comment. Can you hear me?
we can hear you.
Okay. Well, one thing I'm thinking is, Dad, I don't think you mentioned, well, I know people were talking about like, how do you get nurseries to sell more native plants and like, how do you incentivize that? And Dad, you've partnered with, I don't know if you've done that with nurseries, but I'm sure that you could. And you've done that with landscapers, right? To try to like provide some education and a certification or something.
Right. Yeah. At Audubon, we did a program of just education, you know, and certified landscapers, laborers as native plant people, so that in our cul-de-sac, the landscapers come every month and they douse it with God knows what, and the people don't even know. The fertilizer and the 2,4-D, and you know, Scott says, you know, 4 times a year, you know, do. And if you could educate, back to education, if you could educate homeowners and landscapers that they don't have to douse it like that. And we were hoping that they could get a niche. But what I've seen recently is there are native restoration landscaping companies. Planet Wild is one, is working at Armstrong, right? What's it called? Planet Wild? Wild Woods is one. And there's another one called Plant It Wild. So there are landscapers who are selling themselves as just natives, just organic. It's all education. And you know what? You save so much money. The plan we did for John Jay Homestead, instead of cutting that, acres of lawn every week, you know what that costs, and the greenhouse gases, and we just said, the argument was you can save money by cutting it once a year or twice a year. But the advertisement is just, you gotta keep poisoning your lawn. Exactly.
So the landscapers have a big incentive
I know.
not to.
But I really think the homeowners have no idea. They don't even, the bill, they don't even care. So,
Well, I mean, one idea, landscapers could just charge a flat fee. And then they would pocket way more money, by using native plants and fewer pesticides and
you would hope, but you know what?
cutting less often.
What we're finding is, the landscape architects, they're still thinking 50 years ago, what they learned in school. And they're planting, Zakova trees, and Bradford pears, and oh my gosh, that's what they learned. That's what they were taught. And so those professionals are stuck, unfortunately, Kat, in selling ornamentals. But as I said, all these young people, Planet Wild, whatever the other one was, they have a niche. And think of the cancer risk for you and your family. As somebody said, that yellow sign should read, "Oh, look, I just poisoned my yard."
Yeah.
And again, it saves money if you don't use it. So it's changing the ethic. It's all about education, and the people don't know any better. So.
So,
Yeah, thank you. For inviting me.
it's been wonderful having you here. And we are so excited for what you might tell us in the spring.
All right, you touched on some of it.
But I
yeah.
love that you even talked about the mast here. So
Yeah,
I
yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. Okay,
And
yeah, thank you for having me.
we're gonna bring him back. Because trees.
Yeah, yeah. We thought in late winter though, because there's an embarrassment of riches. It's great, but everyone, does their fall festival on the same Saturday. You can't go to, everybody has the native plant sale, in May 1st or Mother's Day, which is great. And the lectures and the hikes, but let's do something in March where people are cooped up and they just want to see some green stuff. So that might be fun. And feel optimistic. Yep, nature is coming back. Yep, sun's gonna come up.